Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Engram, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 14 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics regarding those two positions, beginning with matchups, talking about which defenses thus far this season on average are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends and quarterbacks so that we can identify the most advantageous matchups going into Week 14. After which, I'll transition into talking about my top 16 rankings at both positions, sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player, while also presenting statistics in order to justify these overall rankings. Before we get into today's content, a couple reminders. First and foremost, if you're looking for a specific player, there are timestamps down in the description of the video. Be sure to travel down there. If you enjoy the content and appreciate the timestamps, be sure to click the like button. And if you've yet to do so already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We are very close to achieving our goal of 82,000 subscribers. Thank you very much for all the support. Also, at the end of today's video, after I talk about the tight end and quarterback positions, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em subs via Underdog Fantasy. Again, if you go ahead and travel down to the description of the video and check out the link, traveling on over to Underdog Fantasy at this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match, but you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These are weekly rankings by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, includes flex rankings, all positional rankings. So for those of you who are interested, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen to take advantage of the opportunity of getting my rankings for the remainder of the season. Of course, enjoying Underdog Fantasy, taking advantage of the pick'em slips specifically tonight, because if you go ahead and sign up before tonight's game, you can take advantage of 0.5 total yards via Najee Harris taking on the New England Patriots. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's talk about tight end receiving statistics in terms of matchups. So as you guys can see to the right side of the screen, we have tight end receiving statistics isolated. That's receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns for a half PPR scoring format. When you go ahead and accumulate all those statistics, the fantasy point per game average leads to the New Orleans Saints, Denver Broncos, Cincinnati Bengals, Los Angeles Rams, Houston Texans, etc. being the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. I wanted to go ahead and present these statistics to you so that you have a reference as to what I'm going to refer to over the course of today's episode. Now, some of the more disadvantageous matchups at the tight end position belong to teams like the Cleveland Browns, the Kansas City Chiefs, New York Giants played extremely well against opposing tight ends all season long. In a lot of these scenarios, besides playing well against, average tight ends, they haven't really faced many elite tight ends either, which gives them an advantage. Typically, we want to start our studs, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and progress, and let's talk about my top 16 tight end rankings, beginning with our number one. As per usual, we have Travis Kelce, once again alone in his own tier. Now, slowly but surely, we're getting into a position as the season progresses that Travis Kelce's beginning to look like a normal tight end. He doesn't look like the Travis Kelce of the past. I mean, earlier this season, there were explosive games, but over the course of the last 5 consecutive weeks, he has scored less than 13 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format in every single game. He is slowing down. Again, when you're 34 years old at the tight end position, eventually you're going to slow down. Of course, this last week coming off a performance in which he only had 5 targets, 4 catches, 81 receiving yards. Sure, he got us 10 fantasy points, but that's not the Travis Kelce that we know and love. Unfortunately, we're experiencing a statistical kind of down year for Travis Kelce. Hopefully, he can get back on track to finish off the season strong. But either way, we all know that we're starting him regardless every single week. Moving on to our number 2, we have TJ Hockenson, the guy that may end up taking over for the number 1 overall spot in coming weeks. TJ Hockenson, in the last 4 games in which he has played with Josh Dobbs as a starting quarterback, is averaging 9.8 targets, 6.8 receptions, 77 receiving yards per game, and a half a touchdown per game. So he has scored 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games with Josh Dobbs, averaging 14.08 fantasy points per game. An incredible overall upside of production. On top of the fact that now this offense is getting Justin Jefferson back, many may be thinking that Justin Jefferson is going to pull away targets from TJ Hockenson. I think it just opens up this offense even more for TJ Hockenson to dominate the middle of the field going forward. Our number 3 for this week, we have Sam LaPorta. Sam LaPorta, I mean, an unbelievable performance of 9 targets, 9 receptions, 140 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. 24.5 points last week. This week, he takes on the Chicago Bears. Back in week 11 against the Chicago Bears, 5 targets, 3 catches, 18 receiving yards, caught himself a 2-point conversion, scored 5.3 fantasy points. Now, I've mentioned this in weeks past. There was a route in which he ran. It was a high-low concept in which they ran Amon-Ra St. Brown on an arrow to the pylon. They had Sam LaPorta run a corner route. He was wide open. Unfortunately, Jared Goff didn't throw it last time out against the Chicago Bears. Hopefully, they'll go ahead and key in on that because the Chicago Bears matchup is an advantageous one. Most recently, TJ Hockenson, 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown against them. The New Orleans Saints tight ends, 10 catches, 67, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Donald Parham, 4 catches, 43, and a touchdown. Sam LaPorta should be on his track to performing well this week against the Chicago Bears. Last time out, don't forget, Jared Goff threw 3 interceptions. That made a huge difference. Our number 4 for this week is Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson against the Philadelphia Eagles is primed for another great performance. Besides the fact that he's coming off a week in which he had 6 catches on 8 targets, 77 yards and a touchdown. The last time out against the Philadelphia Eagles, 10 targets, 7 catches, 91 yards and a touchdown, 18.6 half PPR fantasy points. Of course, we're expecting him to dominate because every single tight end over the course of the last couple weeks here has had themselves, pretty solid performances in terms of yardage. It's just a matter of, can he find himself in the end zone, which I believe is going to be highly likely considering how effective the Dallas Cowboys offense has been in the red zone over the course of the last 6 weeks. When we talk about most recent performances from tight ends, Logan Thomas against this defense, 6 catches, 44 and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, 7 catches, 44 and a touchdown. And of course, George Kittle most recently, 4 catches for 68. There's always potential. I'm expecting Jake Ferguson to reach that this week in the red zone. On number 5, speaking of George Kittle, again, even though he had himself a lackluster performance last time out against the Seattle Seahawks, we have to take into perspective the fact that this offense had 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 from Christian McCaffrey and 1 from Deebo Samuel in that game. And anytime George Kittle is going to be without a touchdown, it's going to be a disappointing performance. But this feels like a game in which George Kittle could very easily come away with a touchdown. I know, again, last time out, only 5 targets, 3 receptions, 19 receiving yards, 3.4 fantasy points. It was a short week going from Sunday playing on a Thursday game against the Seattle Seahawks. A short week typically goes ahead and takes a toll on your body. But again, a lot of the rushing upside of this offense definitely dominated in that circumstance. Most recently against the Seattle Seahawks defense, tight ends have played extremely well. So I expect George Kittle to continue that trend. Again, Dallas, their tight ends, 7 catches, 89 and a touchdown last week. Baltimore Ravens, tight ends, 13 receptions, 122. Cleveland tight ends, 5 catches, 83 and a touchdown. Washington tight ends, 8 catches for 61. Hopefully, George Kittle's on track to have himself a fantastic performance here. On number 6 is Taysom Hill. When the New Orleans Saints offense allows him to be a primary threat within this backfield, specifically last week, 13 carries for 59 yards, scored himself a rushing touchdown. When they allow him to be a primary threat, he's going to score fantasy points. It is a given. He takes on the Carolina Panthers this week. In regards to running back statistics allowed, the Carolina Panthers are the 3rd best matchup at the position in terms of rushing statistics isolated, meaning rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. They're allowing over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and they're allowing 4.36 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Taysom Hill should be in line for a fantastic performance. He has scored 17 total touchdowns in the last 28 regular season games he's played. And in week 2 against the Carolina Panthers, had himself a performance of 9 carries for 75 yards. Could very easily see him putting up very similar numbers, but also tacking on a touchdown within the given week. On number 7, to begin the C tier, is Dalton Kincaid. My primary worry with Dalton Kincaid is the fact that Dawson Knox fully practiced on Wednesday. If in fact Dawson Knox is trending towards playing this week, that could in fact impact his overall upside. In the last 5 games without Dawson Knox active, of course, dealing with his injury, we've seen Dalton Kincaid averaging 7.4 targets, 6.2 receptions, 56 receiving yards, 0.4 receiving touchdowns, and 10.72 fantasy points per game. A huge contributor within this offense. I believe, and I am assuming, that Dalton Kincaid is going to continue to maintain a priority role as one of the top 3 receiving options within this offense. Stephon Diggs, Kincaid, Gabe Davis. And going forward, yes, we'll get a couple sprinkles of Dawson Knox. I think that is primarily going to impact Khalil Shakir rather than, potentially the upside of Dalton Kincaid going forward. Our number 8 for this week is Evan Engram, who's coming off a fantastic performance. As the week progressed last week and we got to Sunday morning, I significantly increased his overall ranking based on the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals cannot stop opposing tight ends, and that was evident in the overall performance of Evan Engram. 9 targets, 9 catches, 82 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. In that game, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 31 receiving yards from C.J. Beathard. On C.J. Beathard's overall 10 passing attempts, of course, 4 went in the direction of Evan Engram. That's 40% target share. If in fact C.J. Beathard is going to be the starting quarterback this week as they travel to Cleveland, it is going to be a tough matchup. We did earlier today see that Trevor Lawrence was on the field. He was walking around making passes. He was in his overall, uniform. There is a potential in which Trevor Lawrence's high ankle sprain may not be as severe as it originally kind of looked and was anticipated to be. If in fact we have Trevor Lawrence active and ready to go, Evan Engram maintains as his number 5 spot. They do take on the Browns. That is the toughest matchup at the tight end position, but I would still fire up Evan Engram based on the volume of opportunity he continues to get every single week. Moving on to our number 9. Speaking of the Cleveland Browns, we have David Njoku. In each of the last 2 games, David Njoku has had a receiving touchdown stolen from him by Harrison Bryant. Now, of course, it's the nature of the beast. When an offense wants to utilize multiple tight ends, sometimes 2, if not 3 tight ends within a singular formation, there are going to be opportunities for other guys to score. We've seen this over the years with Harrison Bryant. It's not really a surprise. But the fact of the matter is the Cleveland Browns love to utilize their tight ends. Over the course of the last 7 games, this is the volume of times that they have targeted their tight ends within their offense. 12, 10, 15, 11, 9, 10, and 10. They're giving their tight ends double-digit targets on a weekly basis. And of course, the primary receiving threat within this offense at the tight end position is David Njoku. He's gathering majority of the overall opportunities, the yardage, and of course, occasionally falling into the end zone. Considering how well Joe Flacco played, I think this offense is only going to continue to play well, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, an advantageous matchup. On number 10, we have Dallas Goedert. He should be returning this week. He had a full participation on practice on Wednesday. That should continue to trend in the right direction if he's available to play against the Dallas Cowboys. Just to put it in perspective, from weeks 5 through 9 prior to his injury, which of course has forced him to miss a couple weeks here, he was averaging 6.6 targets, 5 receptions per game, 64.4 receiving yards per game, 0.4 receiving touchdowns per game, and averaging 11.34 fantasy points per game. He is definitely a huge contributor within this offense. Last time out, of course, was playing against the Dallas Cowboys. Didn't have the greatest game, but of course, sustained that injury. We're going to have to keep an eye on him as the week progresses in terms of his overall practice participation, but I do anticipate that he does end up playing this week. Moving on to our number 11 to close out the C tier, we have Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz, another one of these tight ends that, of course, has been dealing with injuries as of late. But prior to his injury, from weeks 4 through 11, this guy was averaging 6.4 targets, 4.6 receptions, 58 receiving yards per game, scoring 0.7 touchdowns per game, and 12.09 half PPR fantasy points per game. In the absence of Tank Dell, if in fact Dalton Schultz is going to be healthy, there's even more target opportunity within this offense, especially considering they take on the New York Jets. It is going to be a difficult matchup for the wide receivers on the outside like Nico Collins, Robert Woods, Noah Brown. Dalton Schultz hopefully is healthy, can get himself a full practice by Friday, and be available for the overall matchup. Moving on to our number 12, we have Cole Kmet. So he's coming off the bye week. The thing about Cole Kmet is he always has touchdown upside. That is always going to be implicated within his overall potential within a game. Now he takes on the Detroit Lions back in week 11 in the matchup, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 20 receiving yards, only 3.5 half PPR fantasy points. A very underwhelming performance. But when we look at the rest of the tight ends that I'm going to mention in just a couple moments, in comparison to the rest of the field, when you go ahead and just look at the overall connection that Justin Fields has with Cole Kmet over the course of the last 2 seasons, they have nearly a 50% touchdown rate in terms of games that they've played together. So as long as Cole Kmet is on the field and he has the potential of a 6-point influx of a touchdown, he's going to be in this top 12 conversation. Moving on to our number 13, we have Isaiah Likely. In week 12 against the Los Angeles Chargers, 6 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards, only 6 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Again, not the greatest week, but he's also trying to fill in for Mark Andrews. And those are big shoes to fill, to say the very least. Luckily, this week they take on the LA Rams at home. The Rams are the 4th best matchup at the tight end position. They're giving up 12.21 fantasy points per game on average to opposing tight ends since week 5. Just to give you some perspective, Cleveland tight ends, 8 catches, 72 and a touchdown last week against the LA Rams. Arizona Cardinals tight ends most recently, 8 catches for 86. Green Bay tight ends, 5 catches, 60 and a touchdown. There is potential considering the LA Rams cannot stop opposing tight ends. And number 14 for this week is Kyle Pitts. He's coming off a performance in which he had 8 targets, 4 receptions, 51 receiving yards, 7.1 fantasy points. Not really a surprise there. I know that last week, Arthur Smith, the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, said that Kyle Pitts is a huge part of this offense and they want to continue to get him utilization. 8 total targets is not a bad number. That's a pretty good share of opportunity. Just needs to execute on more of those opportunities. Hopefully, Desmond Ridder can be just a little bit more accurate in those overall passing attempts. Nonetheless, this week they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last time out, week 7 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 5 targets, 3 receptions, 47 receiving yards, only 6.2 fantasy points. Again, his overall potential for upside is capped, even though this is the 7th best matchup at the position. Levante David and, of course, Devin White are both dealing with injuries. Even with this all taking place, it's very difficult to trust Kyle Pitts considering his association with the lack of overall quarterback upside there with Desmond Ridder. Moving on to our number 15, we have Tyler Conklin. Considering Zach Wilson is going to be the starter going forward, I do expect that Tyler Conklin gets back to being a relevant fantasy option. Even though this last week had himself 9 targets, still only caught the ball 3 times for 35 receiving yards. But in the last 2 games in which Tyler Conklin played with Zach Wilson, 13 targets, 13 receptions, 136 receiving yards, 20.1 half PPR fantasy points. There is a lot of potential here, especially going up against the Houston Texans, the 5th best matchup at the position, allowing over 12 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends since week 5. The final tight end I wanted to mention plays tonight. It's Pat Freiermuth taking on the New England Patriots. The primary reason Pat Freiermuth makes it in at number 16 is because the rest of the field at the tight end position is just unreliable. Guys like Cade Otton, what did he have? 0 targets, 0 receptions last week. Gerald Everett, Michael Mayer. These are just inconsistent options across the board. I do assume that this team is going to continue to highly utilize the tight end position, and they want to go ahead and get Pat Freiermuth the ball on a consistent basis. We know that Mitchell Trubisky is a good enough quarterback to get the job done. It's just a matter of can they execute properly and hopefully help them find the end zone. It's going to be tough, especially in a game that's going to be primarily a low-scoring contest between these two defensive-heavy teams. Time will tell. Either way, let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about the quarterback rankings, beginning with matchups. As you guys can see to the right side of the screen, we have quarterback passing statistics allowed. So I've gone ahead and isolated passing yards, passing touchdowns, and interceptions thus far this season from weeks 5 through 13. As you can tell, the Washington Commanders, Philadelphia Eagles, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Detroit Lions are the most advantageous matchups going to a given week. Now, of course, the Washington Commanders, Arizona Cardinals, they are on bye week, so we won't be able to take advantage of 2 of the top 8 matchups, but nonetheless, we can still take advantage of the fact that Dak Prescott's going to have himself a fantastic performance against the Philadelphia Eagles, a defense that is, of course, not only giving up a boatload of yards, but a lot of touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks. Either way, I'll refer back to these statistics over the course of today's episode. I also wanted to go ahead and introduce some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into a given week. The New York Jets, of course, CJ Stroud will have his hands full, especially without Tank Dell. It's not going to be easy. The Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Browns, etc. The Cleveland Browns at home, in comparison to being away, are a significantly better defense, so keep that in mind. And they also get Denzel Ward back this week in comparison to last week, in which they obviously got a high volume of points dumped on them by the Los Angeles Rams. All right, with this all covered, let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings, beginning with our number 1. We have Jalen Hurts taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Jalen Hurts, a couple weeks back, in week 9 against the Dallas Cowboys, 25.88 fantasy points, scored 3 touchdowns in the game. Of course, Jalen Hurts has continued his trend of consistency. He has scored 2+ touchdowns in the last, 11 consecutive games. On top of that, has scored 12 rushing touchdowns in the last 12 games. Of course, he continues to ball out every single week, and taking on the Dallas Cowboys should be a shootout of a matchup. Now, speaking of the Dallas Cowboys versus Philadelphia Eagles shootout, we have Dak Prescott as our number 2. Dak Prescott last time out against the Philadelphia Eagles, 28.36 fantasy points, scored 3 touchdowns. In that same game, he stepped out of bounds for a 2-point conversion that was a failure, could add himself extra 2 points, and also threw a pass to his tight end, which was pretty much 1 inch away from scoring a touchdown. Unfortunately, on 4th down, turnover on downs, wasn't able to score that. Very easily could have beat the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Now they take on this team, this terrible secondary in Dallas. There should be an advantage for Dak Prescott. I'm expecting him to go ahead and ball out. He has scored 21 touchdowns in the last 6 games that he has played. This is the second best matchup at the quarterback position. I'm expecting a lot of upside here for Dak Prescott, the thumbnail of today's episode. Our number 3 to close out the S tier is Josh Allen. Josh Allen, in the last 2 games with the new offensive coordinator, Joe Barry, has been playing incredibly well. He's averaging 307 passing yards, 2.5 passing touchdowns, 48 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and 31.08 fantasy points per game in the last 2 weeks with Joe Barry. He has scored himself 7 touchdowns in the last 2 games he has played against the Kansas City Chiefs, whether that's been in the regular season or in the playoffs. I'm expecting the Buffalo Bills to come out off of the bye week, having prepared 2 weeks for this defense, to come out and put up a huge number against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. Moving on to our number 4. We have Brock Purdy. Over the course of this week, we've heard a lot of Brock Purdy MVP conversations. Well, as of late, he really is playing extremely well. I mean, in terms of fantasy purposes, 3 of the last 4 games he has played, 3+ touchdowns. Coming off a performance against the Philadelphia Eagles, 314 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Of course, all 4 of those passing touchdowns to his wide receivers, on top of the fact that, of course, Christian McCaffrey scoring a rushing touchdown, Deebo Samuel scoring a rushing touchdown. The offense couldn't be stopped. They take on the Seattle Seahawks this week. I understand that back in week 12 against the Seattle Seahawks, Brock Purdy only had 10.46 fantasy points, but you have to understand that there were 3 rushing touchdowns within that game, 2 for Christian McCaffrey and 1 towards Deebo Samuel. And I can't promise you that that won't happen again this week, but I do anticipate that Brock Purdy could end up putting up a performance of 250 passing yards, probably 2 to 3 passing touchdowns, with even more upside considering how well he's played over the course of the season. And if in fact the Seattle Seahawks can improve their play, they play significantly better against the San Francisco 49ers the second time they take them on within a given season. So I'm expecting this to be a little bit more of a competitive matchup between these 2 teams. And of course, that'll allow Brock Purdy to find even more upside for fantasy purposes. Our number 5 for this week is Justin Fields. I feel very confident about Justin Fields taking on the Detroit Lions. Last time out against this defense, it was the first week back from his injury. He had himself 169 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, 18 rushing attempts for 104 rushing yards, 21.16 fantasy points. Now, this isn't a rare occasion. Whenever Justin Fields takes on the Detroit Lions, he is running for majority of the game. In the last 3 games in which he has taken on the Detroit Lions, 2022 and 2023, he's had himself 104, 132, and 147 rushing yards. I'm expecting him to go ahead, run the ball heavily, because that's typically the game plan against the Detroit Lions defense. In the last 2 weeks prior to the bye week, we have seen a lot more designed runs in the direction of Justin Fields. Specifically, in the last 2 games, he has had himself 104 rushing yards and 59 rushing yards. 69 of those yards scrambles, and of course, 94 of those overall rushing yards on designed runs. As long as they continue to give Justin Fields designed overall opportunities within the running game, his overall upside and potential success for fantasy purposes only continues to grow, as he has the potential of scoring himself 30 points in any given week, considering how dynamic he is on the ground. Moving on to our number 6, we have Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, as of late, I understand, has been very underwhelming. In 4 of the last 5 games he has played, he has scored less than 15 fantasy points, and that's why he sits at number 6. I really can't justify playing him over these top 5 options, but I can justify playing him considering he takes on the Los Angeles Rams at home. The Rams are the 13th best matchup at the position. They're allowing 14.00 fantasy points per game in terms of passing statistics isolated. On top of the fact that all season long, Lamar Jackson has been a rushing threat. Now, even though he hasn't scored as many rushing touchdowns as he did in the first half of the season, he's continuing to get himself about 8 to 12 rushing attempts per game. And as long as that's going to be there with the influx of getting himself 50 to 60 rushing yards, the potential of a rushing touchdown, on top of the fact that he's going to be able to get it done through the air against a defense like the LA Rams, who just gave up, 254 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns to Joe Flacco in his first game of the season. I'm expecting Lamar Jackson to have himself a solid week. Our number 7, Tua Tagovailoa. Tua Tagovailoa and this Dolphins offense will dominate lesser teams like the Tennessee Titans, and that's exactly what they're going to do. The only issue with Tua Tagovailoa is if, in fact, this game isn't competitive in the second half, and just like against the Washington Commanders, they're up, 20, plus points at halftime, there may be a situation in which the offense does not throw the ball in the second half. They're running the clock out with Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., Devon Achane, and of course, the potential for upside for Tua Tagovailoa is capped. So hopefully he can do as much damage as possible in the first half of the game. So if, in fact, we get into the second half and it is a one-sided affair, many of us aren't getting hurt for fantasy purposes. Again, he did end up scoring 19 fantasy points last week, and imagine it was a run-heavy game script in the second half. Moving on to our number 8, we have Patrick Mahomes. From weeks 8 through 13, Patrick Mahomes has been the number 25 overall quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game on average, only averaging 15.1 fantasy points per game. Those are not promising numbers. Now, I understand if you go back and look at the last couple weeks, besides this last performance against the Green Bay Packers, he was on a 3-game streak in which he had himself 2 touchdowns in each of those 3 games. And very easily, there could be a conversation to be had in which the Marquez Valdez-Scantling non-called penalty at the end of that game could have led to another Patrick Mahomes touchdown and could have ended up leading them to a victory. That could all be a part of the conversation, but the fact of the matter is Patrick Mahomes, this receiving core, they're not playing up to their overall potential. And considering that and the fact that they take on the Buffalo Bills, who has been preparing for them for the last couple weeks, I am anticipating for Patrick Mahomes to be a little bit of a lesser play, but still always has the potential of being the best quarterback in any given week. Therefore, he sits at number 8. Beginning the C tier, we have our number 9, Jordan Love. From weeks 10 through 13, he has had himself 4 consecutive games of 2 or more passing touchdowns. He is averaging 21.96 fantasy points per game throughout that span of time of 4 games. As long as he continues to play as well as he has, he's not turning over the ball, his passing completion percentage is significantly higher to where it was earlier on in the season. And as long as Christian Watson is going to maintain his health and be able to be eligible to play this week, there's a huge contingency there because, of course, Christian Watson elevates the potential of Jordan Love in the deep ball receiving game. As long as he is going to be healthy and active against the New York Giants, again, it's not one of the better matchups, but I do anticipate the Green Bay Packers to be able to go ahead and put up a huge number against this defense. Moving on to our number 10, we have Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has been extremely consistent. 4 of the last 5 games he has played, he's been able to score 2 or more touchdowns. Now, this season alone, he's been able to do something that we haven't seen in quite a while. Russell Wilson's been able to accumulate the most rushing yards in his career since 2020. It's been quite a while since we've seen Russell Wilson run at the rate at which he has. Over the course of the last 5 games, these are some of the numbers in which he has in terms of overall rushing opportunity and production. 8 carries for 30 rushing yards, 9 carries for 30 rushing yards, 11 carries for 34 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, 10 carries for 44 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Those are the last 2 weeks. He scored himself a rushing touchdown, got himself 30 to 40 rushing yards. When you're getting a 10+ influx of fantasy points via just rushing statistics alone from a quarterback like Russell Wilson, of course, he's going to continue to have himself fantastic performances. I understand that he turned over the ball 3 times last week, and that obviously hurt his overall potential for upside. But going into this week's matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, I do expect him to play far better. Moving on to our number 11, we have Jared Goff. Jared Goff, started off hot last week. Easily was able to complete a passing touchdown to Sam LaPorta early in that game and also to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then they went ahead and they just kind of rested. They went ahead, tried to kill the clock as quickly as they could, kicked a lot of field goals, and just played not to lose rather than playing to just try to pour on points against that defense. And that really did hurt the overall potential for upside from Jared Goff. Nonetheless, he put up a solid performance. This week they take on the Chicago Bears. Last time out, like I've mentioned before, Jared Goff, not the greatest overall day, had himself 3 interceptions, but still led his team to a victory with a comeback with about, I think, 8 minutes left in the game. They came back down like 15 points and ended up winning that game. Nonetheless, in each of the last 4 games consecutively, 2 passing touchdowns per game. I'm expecting another consistent performance of over 200 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, over 16 fantasy points from Jared Goff this week. Moving on to our number 12, we have Joshua Dobbs. Joshua Dobbs, I know last time out against the Chicago Bears on Monday Night Football, 4 interceptions, really did hurt many of our fantasy teams. But, the prior performances that he put up with the Minnesota Vikings does give us a little bit of hope that with the return of Justin Jefferson, he can return to excellence. I mean, again, some of the more recent performances, 24.92, 25.12, 16.94. Again, he's been an efficient fantasy quarterback, and he's only going to get better as Justin Jefferson returns and elevates his overall potential, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders defense, which I'm sure we all can agree isn't one of the better defenses in the National Football League. I'm expecting a solid performance here from Joshua Dobbs. Moving on to our number 13, we have CJ Stroud. I understand he takes on the New York Jets. It is one of the more difficult matchups at the position. He's coming off a week in which he took on a very difficult matchup against the Denver Broncos, and their secondary has played extremely well as of late. Nonetheless, CJ Stroud, in the absence of Tank Dell, was still able to go ahead, lead his team to victory, and find himself a lot of production through the air. 274 passing yards on 27 passing attempts, 1 passing touchdown. Wasn't able to get himself another rushing touchdown, but he always has the ability to do so. This is the toughest matchup at the quarterback position. We have seen quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes struggle against this defense at times this season, but we've also seen performances from Jalen Hurts, another performance from Josh Allen in which they've put up great performances. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that CJ Stroud could have himself a solid week here. Therefore, I have him at number 13. On number 14 is Justin Herbert. I honestly can't believe just how bad this offense is. The fact that they were only able to put up 6 points, the running game is inept, it's non-existent, the offensive line play is not great. Outside of Keenan Allen, there really isn't any other dependable receiving options. This is just, it's a tough situation for Justin Herbert, and he's trying his best. He doesn't really have much to work around him. They're not playing very well. And the fact of the matter is, I'm actually surprised that Kellen Moore, as the new offensive coordinator, has put together something that is worse than last year from Joe Lombardi. Joe Lombardi, now the offensive coordinator of the Denver Broncos. It's going to be a little bit of a revenge game for him on the other side of this matchup. But nonetheless, Justin Herbert, there really isn't anything that's promising within this offense as of late. It's beginning to worry me, and especially if, in fact, the Denver Broncos defense comes out and plays well, we could end up having another lackluster performance from Justin Herbert. That would not surprise me. My number 15 for this week is Jake Browning. I don't expect him to be able to keep up this level of performance. An 86.5% passing completion percentage, 32 of 37, is an unattainable number on a consistent basis. As long as he's going to continue to be a 250 passing yard player, 1 or 2 touchdowns per game, he is going to be fantasy relevant considering the options that surround him within this offense. And of course, his rushing ability, 2 carries, 22 yards, and a rushing touchdown last week. If that continues to be a consistent option of his game, should be a fantastic play. My number 16 for this week, we have Trevor Lawrence. Earlier today, we saw him practicing. We saw him not limping in comparison to where he was Monday night after that brutal injury, limping back to the locker room. Obviously, for some reason, they didn't want to go ahead and bring out the cart to be able to wheel him off. But nonetheless, Trevor Lawrence, if in fact he is healthy and the injury is not as serious as we initially anticipated and not as gruesome as it looked, and the high ankle sprain is not going to bother him taking on the Cleveland Browns this week, he is a startable option. I don't know if he's going to play. That's why I have him at number 16. This is a contingency play here. We'll go ahead and reevaluate this by the time we get the Sunday morning's live stream, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention him because, again, there is a potential in which he does play. All right, with this all covered, let's go ahead and let's close out today's video by putting together a couple pick'em slips via Underdog Fantasy right now. So on Monday, my 2 favorite plays that I suggested to you guys was Calvin Ridley going higher on his overall targets and, of course, Evan Engram going higher on his overall receiving yards. Both those ended up hitting, and which were fantastic. Obviously, getting back on track from Sunday's debacle of Sam Howell only having himself 23 passing attempts. I don't even know how that's possible, but again, the Miami Dolphins ran the ball a lot in the second half. Nonetheless, when we're talking about tonight, my favorite play going into tonight, and the one that I'm primarily going to suggest, is Deontay Johnson going higher than 42.5 receiving yards. In all 5 of the games in which Deontay Johnson has played with Mitchell Trubisky back in 2022 as his starting quarterback, Deontay Johnson has passed this number easily in all 5 of those games, has been able to get himself 57 receiving yards minimum with a starting Mitch Trubisky going back to last season. So my anticipation within the matchup is that Deontay Johnson should very easily be able to accomplish this number. This is my favorite play of tonight. Now, there could be a potential in which you go ahead and put in a rushing yard total of like Najee Harris going over 51.5. I think that is also another number that is very much so capable. But if we're looking for a play in terms of getting both of these teams kind of within the overall game, I would probably be on the side of like going after like Chad Ryland, going lower on his overall kicking points. I don't expect this team, I don't expect the New England Patriots to be able to score. And really, I'm just looking towards going on lower on majority of these statistics. I don't really think that many of these guys are going to be able to put up huge numbers. Is there a number for like interceptions? Yeah, there's a number at 1.5. Can you imagine? Very seldom do you get, 0.5 on a player. This is at 1.5. Nonetheless, like if we're talking about like Bailey Zappi scoring a passing touchdown, I think I would probably go lower on that. But my favorite play, first and foremost, the one that I would like to suggest, and I want to put it out on the record, I'm taking higher on Deontay Johnson. I will throw him in with a couple sprinkles here and there, but this is my favorite play. This is the one that I suggest you follow and go ahead and put it with a couple sprinkles around, whether it is the NFL, the NBA tonight, all that kind of jazz. All right, guys, thank you everybody for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with Hidden Gems. Until next time, have a good night. Hopefully this game is going to be a little bit more entertaining, hopefully higher scoring, but I doubt that's going to be the case. Either way, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.